Let me call the first meeting of the Electoral Board in 2024 to order. If you would please rise for a moment of silence and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here this morning. Let's see. So the first item of business, I guess, is composition of the board. So the three of us are back for another term. Now, if London would like to assume the chair and I became secretary, we could do that, or we could, we could keep all of us in our current position. So, what's your pleasure?
I decline. Never quit a winner. I'll stay the course.
All right. So we will stay in our current positions for the rest of the year. The next item of business is approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 minutes. We have the minutes for the November 8th post-election. No, we got two sets of the same minutes.
I think I printed up two of the November 8th
we
minutes.
need the October 16th board meeting minutes.
Yes. You want to let us remedy that, and we'll come back to that one a little bit later?
I move that we table this until later in the meeting.
Okay.
Until Eric can come up with the right copy.
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
All right. So we'll come back to the minutes. Recognition of special visitors. Thank you all. You're all special, so thanks for being here today. Report from the Electoral Board members. London, do you have anything?
No.
Okay. Mark?
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing to report.
Okay. Only thing I want to mention, so I have talked to several members of our delegation to Richmond about the problems with the lack of a party ID for the local races. I think almost everyone will agree that was the biggest challenge we had last year. So Delegate Sewell is working on some legislation to try and address that. I don't know exactly what form it will take, but I'm hopeful that the General Assembly will do something so that we don't have this issue again every time we have that cycle for local elections. So let's see, next is General Registrar's report.
Okay, well, it's the start of the year here, so we've got a long report today. We also had some news this week. I know that the Michelle White case was dismissed. Uncertain the status of the investigation at this point. I don't know if they're continuing that in any form or fashion. I know that individuals are interested in the data that's there, and I did send an email to the AG's office yesterday asking them if this, allows that to be, the documents from that to be released. So I'm just waiting to hear back on them. I wanted to point out, it's interesting in these things, kind of knowing what you know and seeing commentary from both presumably liberal and conservative individuals, on the matter. And I've seen everything from the, Attorney General's office must have pressured individuals to say certain things and then that changed, and or staff must be not telling the truth, and unfortunately not unfortunately, but the reality is much more mundane. And the fact of the matter is that our staff voluntarily brought this information to the AG's office in the first place, and then staff voluntarily assisted with that process, trying to provide information from, mundane details of your work life from 2 to 3 years ago, and working with, the AG's office, who don't necessarily have a background in, election law and in some of the processes there, and they had to learn a lot as they went through that process. So I wanted to point out that at no point did we have pressure from the AG's office. I told our staff to just be, truthful and helpful to the AG's office, and we were. We were not under a compulsion to testify. When you're remembering things from a while ago, sometimes that can be difficult. I'll provide an example for myself. I had a reporter ask me what I testified to from my subpoena early last year. I said, well, I don't recall getting a subpoena early last year. And they then sent me the document of the subpoena, and I said, oh, right, well, I didn't actually go in to testify because that court date was later moved. And frankly, at the time of that subpoena, I was preparing for my surgery, so it wasn't really at the top of my, biggest concerns at that moment. I wasn't being untruthful with that reporter. It was just hard to remember all the details of something that happens. And, to quote the movie, Groundhog Day, it's Groundhog Day all over again. We run elections over and over and over again, and we go through the same patterns and the same processes. And, to be honest with you, sometimes it gets difficult to remember everything. So I think I just wanted to point it out that I don't think that in my opinion, I'm not going to talk too much about the details of the case, but I didn't get anything from the AG's office where they were being political or pressuring our office in any way, and I didn't get any sense from our staff that they were doing anything but providing the information that they could. This was a difficult time for the staff. I don't think that there were obviously a lot of mistakes and problems at that time and things that, I think that the GR at the time could have done better. Obviously, the AG's office has decided that they didn't rise to the level of criminality or negligence at that point. So that's really all I can say at this point. If we're able to present more information to people at some point about, the details and the numbers that I know people are interested in, we will do that. So, any questions from the board about that? Okay.
No questions.
Okay. Okay, so an overview of 2024. We're going to go through some different topics today that we've got. So, in terms of our elections, we're going to have a couple busy years ahead of us here. We have 3 elections on the schedule this year. Based on a lot of the individuals who we know are likely to be running, it's very possible we could have 3 elections next year, and we already had 3 this year. So we've had a pretty busy schedule over these last couple years here, and looking forward. On March 5th, we have a presidential preference primary. That is a dual primary with 3 Democrats and 6 Republican candidates for president. Our ballots have been approved. We're in the process of setting up all of our schedules. We're going to talk about that a little bit with our task list today. So we are making preparations for that. On June 18th, we'll have another primary. That'll be congressional primary races, likely a dual primary with expected open House seats and a wide open field of potential candidates. London also pointed out that there is a Senate race as well there, so we will have a pretty high interest primary this summer. And then, of course, in our 4-year cycle, the largest election by far is the general election on November 5th. This is a presidential general election. We expect a very large turnout across the country for this, and the past few presidential cycles has been upwards of 70, 80, 85% in some places, much higher than what we normally expect in a given election. So we have plans to expand staff over time and a number of election officers to meet those demands. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later today. Any questions about that timeline from? Okay. All right, so I wanted to review a little bit our absentee voting by mail process. We've had some questions about this. There seem to be some misunderstandings about a few elements of this. So anytime a voter votes by mail, the first part of that is they're going to apply, and then our staff is going to review that application. Now, that application can be for a permanent, where they're getting a mail ballot for every election, or it can be specific to one election. Once we have reviewed those applications, then we go through and we prepare data to send to our vendor, who then mails out those ballots. So most of those ballots go out at that 45-day mark. That usually is about 70, 80%, maybe even more of our ballots all go out early, and then we still get a few applications that come in Those ballots are then delivered to those voters, and voters can either decide to mail back that ballot, or they still have the option to go vote in person, should they so choose. We've had a little confusion then about what happens at that point. So at that point, we do what we call intake, which is ballots arriving at our office where they're date stamped. We are required to enter those ballots into the system on the date that they arrive. We're required to date stamp them, and our staff actually checks them 3 times for accurate information provided by the voter. This is important because what we want to do is, if there are any issues, we want to move those ballots to the curing process as soon as possible. Now, this is where I've seen a lot of people not understand what curing is, and I've heard some people say, well, we'd like to observe curing. Curing is a spreadsheet that's shared with the party chairs on a routine basis. And we notify people by letter of problems with their ballot and send them something saying there was an issue with your ballot. To correct it, please complete this form. Now, the good news is, for this past November's election, we had an update to the state procedure. Our office and a number of offices around the state have been asking the state to update a form that was used this past November, and that form was very effective and helpful, made it easier for people to cure their ballot, and we had a much higher cure rate this past election. I want to say it was somewhere in the range of 60 to 65%, whereas it's normally much lower than that. So that was really good, but curing is not really a observable process unless you want to sit at Colleen and Cynthia's desk and watch them enter data into a spreadsheet. They are putting that information in there, they're providing that to the chairs, and then we are using that to send out mail and that kind of thing. After all those ballots are intake, the ones that don't have any issues, those then go to the election officer review, and that process is publicly observed. They check in those voters on a poll book. They make sure they haven't moved or that they didn't vote in this election already. They separate the ballot from the envelopes. Once that process is complete, they decide that that ballot should be counted. And any issues that are not identified at that point go to curing. So if something has gotten through that first stage, then it would go back. But 99% of the curing issues really get identified within the first 24 hours of us getting a ballot. And that's important so that the individuals who have sent that back have an opportunity to make that correction. The most common things that we see as issues are really just, especially with the changes this year and having to provide the year of birth and the last 4 of the social security number, is people either missing that information or some other material omission that would render that ballot to not be counted. Once that process is done, we're counting those ballots on the high-speed scanner, and that process is sort of done continuously over the past several weeks before election night, and then we even continue to count ballots after that, because the state allows for ballots to arrive up till the Friday after the election. In this case, as we have sometimes happen, Friday was a holiday in this last election, so that date then goes to the following Monday. I know you talked about legislation a little earlier, Keith, and another thing that's kind of up for consideration is trying to move that certification date, because the lengthening of that ballot arrival period has made it very tough for you all, the boards and the staff, to sort of condense down that certification process when your ballot deadline is only a little over 24 hours before the certification deadline. That makes it pretty challenging. So, any questions from you all about the?
No, and just to clarify, so there's specific steps that the office takes in the curing process, and then the information is also provided to the political party chairs, because, you know, the chair of the political parties are obviously interested in following up and chasing and making sure that anybody whose ballot needs to be cured, the voters know how to do it and the deadlines and all that information.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
Could you expand a little bit on the pre-cure process, just the reception, how the new envelopes that we designed last year, how there's a check built into that with there's the ID, I believe it is, on the bottom of the envelope that's matched to the particular voter.
You're talking about the scanning portion
scanning
of it?
portion,
Well, there is a
yes.
portion of the ballot that's scannable. What we also have is we have a window where the voter's ballot, obviously the secrecy of the ballot is paramount here. So when that ballot arrives, the window on the back of that envelope is taken off. And that was a redesign that we did. I don't remember when that was. Was that after 2022? Okay, so after 2022, when we had some issues with the design of the ballot then, we worked with our vendor to redesign that ballot so that that window could be taken off. And then what we actually do is an extra step there where we put a seal on that window to make it more difficult that someone wouldn't be able to see the ballot or access the ballot without breaking that seal. So that just provides extra reinforcement. But really, you would have to just tear the ballot all the way open if you were going to do that. It'd be very obvious to the election officers when they went to review that the secrecy of that ballot had been, had been broken. So
The reason I asked the question is the point is to assure that the public that there's a process even prior to curing.
Yeah.
Where there's a validation of this particular envelope that came from this address. There's that window, you open it up, you check the year of birth and the last four of the social, and you verify that with the strip.
Yes.
You would already, again, that was all predetermined prior to mailing that
Yes.
information in basically in the intake process.
yeah, and really it's checked 3 times. So there's an initial check when we look at that information. We make sure just that, first of all, just a scan that all those fields are filled out. So if they just missed something, that's a very obvious cure. Then if they didn't put their address in at all, or they didn't put their social security number, that's an obvious one. We don't even have to check the system. We can put that straight into the cure bin. After that point, it's still checked 2 more times. So the officer, the staff that is looking at those, they are checking that against against the system, against the poll book, not against the poll book. I'm sorry, against Veris. I'm sorry, and they're making sure that the information is matching up with the information that is on the envelope. They review that, and then the teams that go through and they do that actually then switch all their materials and they quality check it a second time, so that way we're making sure to catch those issues before it reaches the election officers. And then of course you have another check with the election officers when it reaches that point. So
And the election officers are all experienced officers that are approved by the 2 party chairs to work during the pre-processing.
yes, yeah, and most of them that are doing pre-processing or working in CAP have done it for a number of years, although we're always adding new individuals to that process. And I'm sure in November we're going to have a big crew for that. So yeah, we have bipartisan teams that work there. Oh, okay, and the envelope also has the ballot ID on it as well. So, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about election integrity. I think over the past couple of years since I've been here, there's certainly been a high priority issue, and we've had a lot of concerns that we have addressed, whether it's changes to our LNA process, whether we have implemented modifications to our voter registration follow-ups, to just different procedures that we have in place. And I want to note that we're happy to consider changes. I do a really good job of responding to just about all the email that I get from people. But I can't review all of those changes. Part of my job and the board's job is using the resources that we have, which is both, money, time, staff, all those things. And we have to make sure that we are addressing things that really are showing themselves to be problems, and that is continuous. There's a feedback cycle in elections where you are constantly looking at each election, analyzing the issues that you had, making adjustments and changes to those, and those can be because of law changes, those can be because of changes in the environment, those can be simple things like we were just talking about, the design of an envelope making a big difference in terms of how secure the ballot is inside of that envelope. So different things like that. We do have a state unit. I just talked about the Michelle White case, and we've had a state unit that's been looking at these issues, and we haven't seen any significant issues other than some misinformation that's been put out there by some groups. So I think that we've made a lot of adjustments and changes to this, and I wanted to talk about what the levels are here. So at the bottom of this is a perfect election, and you notice I've crossed that out because I've been in elections. This will be my 14th year in elections, and I've yet to see the perfect election happen. I would love to see it, but it is very elusive when you have hundreds of thousands of voters, when you have hundreds of pieces of equipment, when you have 1,000 officers, when you have 50 staff members. There are issues that are gonna come up. So really the two elements that you look at are, what are the quality control measures you're putting in place and the processes you're putting in place to try to keep those issues occurring to a minimum? And then what redundancies and what actions are you taking when those issues do arrive to try to make them, as small as possible? So as an example, I know before the last election, we talked about how we had one batch of ballots. So it was about 300 ballots that went out the individuals got the wrong ballot. Now, that was a pretty small portion of our mail ballots. We sent out a lot of mail ballots, tens of thousands of them. But it affected a significant number of people. And so we responded immediately to, contact those individuals and to tell them what actions they needed to take to correct that problem. We had a number of them sent back in the wrong ballot. We were able to get the correct ballot from nearly all of them. At the end of the process, what we had was 4 voters who sent the wrong ballot back, and we were only able to count part of that ballot. We were still able to count things like the county-wide races that they would have been able to vote for, but they might not have had their vote counted for, let's say, their district supervisor or their House of Delegates representative, because their ballot didn't align with that. So our staff, does not feel good about that, but I think they did an excellent job of taking an issue that occurred, responding to it, and then also looking at how we can, prevent that in the future and what quality control measures we can put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think what we see mostly in this space is minor issues and or significant issues, or major issues. And how you define those is going to be different. I mean, I know that in the November election, for example, I know in Mississippi, I believe, they had an election and they ran out of ballots at a number of locations. And that's obviously a really big, problem. We had sending 300 ballots to the wrong people was probably a significant issue. I think the way we handled it pushed it back down into, a minor issue. And we're going to have those. So I think what we're working on is continuing to improve how we approach these things in terms of the quality control and process we have, and trying to keep things as minor and insignificant as we can. What I see out in the space with election integrity sometimes are people talking about things in the way that we go above the line there, where now you're talking about negligence, now you're talking about fraud. And I have to say that in 13 years in elections, I've never seen anybody take any kind of action that related to fraud, where they were actually trying to actively change the results of the election. Now, that doesn't mean that can't happen, or that we shouldn't be vigilant against that. But I think that people have to be careful about when we're talking about these things, what are we talking about? And so I think we need to understand that in the outcomes of these, when you have irresponsible accusations, those lead to security concerns for staff and officers. So if you're just talking about, I read something online, or you are attacking members of our staff, and I will say this, if you want to criticize me, I am the director of elections. You go right ahead. I am paid to be criticized. I make decisions. People are going to, you're never going to be satisfied completely with the decisions that you make. Hindsight is always 20/20. But we try to do the best we can. I try to make the best decisions I can. And, the board is in the same position. They're elected, and they are public representatives of the parties. And so I think there's some criticism that's going to come to us. I think it's unfair when it goes down to the level of junior staff. And I will defend our staff and say they do a fantastic job, and they work very hard. They're very honest. They're very hardworking. They serve the public. And I think all of these individuals that have worked through everything that's been going on over the past 2 to 3 years has really been a challenge, both just logistically. It's not easy being an election official in Virginia. You're asked to do twice the work that officials in other states are. But given the political environment that we're in, I hope that at some point we come out the other side on some of this contention. But I wanted to note that people need to be responsible with the accusations that they make. They need to be backed by evidence. They need to be based on real concerns, and the concern level should be considerate of the depth of that concern. If you are talking about a minor issue and you're accusing someone of fraud, well, then that's not really appropriate. I think you also have to consider the appropriate audience for some of these things. You know, the board is not going to make law changes that affect state law. A lot of situations I am bound by procedures that are based on federal law and state law, state guidance from the State Department of Elections. We all have some discretion in a few matters, but we're not a lawmaking body here. And it's unfair for people to put concerns about what the law is. And by all means, write your senators, write your representatives, write your delegates, write the governor, tell them what your concerns are and how you think the law should be different. You know, I try not to build my opinions into certain things here, but there are certain things that I would love to see changed, you know, about the law, and I know my fellow registrars around the state, you know, feel the same way. But it's our duty, whether we agree with the law or not, whether we think it's convenient for elections or not, to make sure that we're executing elections to that, you know, to that duty, I think is really the important word there. So I just wanted to make some comments about that. To that end, I want to try to consolidate some of these things. So I'm going to try to work, once we have our new party chairs in place. I know we just added a new Democratic chair, and I don't think the Republican chair has been decided yet. So once we have that in place, I think what we're going to try to do is set up a meeting with the chairs and some of the other representatives and some of you individuals who have been involved in this over the past few years, and try to look at what those biggest concerns are. I think that's really important going into the general election in November. Obviously, there's a lot of contention around that. I want to try to anticipate what those concerns are. I want to try to address what we can. I said when I started my job, hey, if you guys like me most of the time, but I tick you off every once in a while on both sides, then I'm probably doing my job well. So, and everybody is not going to get exactly what they want, but we want to try to meet some of those concerns as best we can. We also want to do some kind of demonstration in August to show the public how the equipment works. I know that those of you who are in the room right now, we see your faces pretty often at these meetings. I know most of you by first name. So I know that you're pretty familiar with how our equipment works, what our processes are. There are some of you who are very well versed in the code, who understand the registration process, or you know how a poll book works very well. But we want to try to expand that to the public a little bit more, to show them how our equipment works, to demonstrate that our scanners and how those work in action, to provide details on how the process works. So we're going to try to build something in August so that we can branch that out to the broader public a little bit more. So I just wanted to touch on that because I do think that it's important, but I also think that we have to, with a busy election year ahead of us, we have to kind of consolidate these things in a way that is more productive for how we're going about them. Any questions or comments from the board on that?
Yeah, just one thing. This will be my 5th presidential election, and one thing that, following on your comments, it's important, I think, for everybody to do, is focus on what's actually happening in Virginia and Prince William County. You know, whatever you may be hearing about what's going on in Mississippi or Georgia or Michigan, that doesn't reflect what's happening in Virginia and Prince William County. So I want to commend Eric and his staff. I think we've made incredible progress over the last several years. We had some very challenging years, and I think that we can all be proud of the process and the team that's running the elections here. But I think it's important for voters and voter integrity groups, whoever it is, focus on Virginia and Prince William County, not what you may be hearing about what's going on in other states. And that's particularly important. The presidential year, the presidential cycle is just so many times more complex than the other 3 cycles that we have. And so, I just want people to understand that I think we have a good team. They follow the law, and I think our processes are good in Virginia and the county.
All right. I voted sticker contest. So we talked a lot about processes and election integrity and different issues. There is no more important thing as a general registrar to most people in the public than I could do than providing a nice sticker for the after voting process. Because we love stickers when we're kids, and we still love them when we're adults. And nothing is more prideful for people than putting on that I voted sticker to demonstrate they're participating in their civic duty. So we are trying to get something that is a little more specific to Prince William County. We've been using kind of a generic, American flag I voted sticker, which are fine. But in January, so shortly here, we are launching a contest. We're going to appeal to high schools, the arts community. It's open for all to enter. We're going to try to solicit designs from people. So we're going to focus on the uniqueness of the design, something that relates to our county identity specifically, and the overall strength of design. So you can see a few examples here. Everything from, you can kind of see a little of Louisiana's very beautifully impressionist painting sticker there, to Colorado's sort of retro logo on the left, to the sort of weird spider that I think won in New York. It was one of those, I think an online crowd sort of took over and voted the spider in as the I voted design, to the Vegas Strip. A lot of these designs that sort of reflect the communities that they represent. So this is going to be running through January and February. After that, staff and board are going to screen those entries. So board members will get one pick each for whatever they decide as their finalists. The staff will rifle through the designs and add a few more finalists to that. And then in April and May, we're going to announce those finalists, and we'll have voting. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our election officers. They're going to be the ones that are going to be voting for the final design. So we're going to have finalists. So this will be a good opportunity for us to also say, hey, if you want to get to vote for the I voted sticker, sign up to be an election officer. And it's a way to reward the individuals who go out there election after election and really serve the public and are the unsung heroes of the election process, many of whom are in the room today. So thank you all, and we'll be announcing more information about that. And then over the summer, likely in July, we'll announce the winner of the contest, and then that will be the sticker that we'll be using in November for the presidential election. So should be something a little bit fun and bring some kind of positive attention to our election process, and something to kind of get people engaged. We do have prizes for the top 3 vote getters, including the winner, so that we can use their design in our materials. And we also are going to have a prize for the school that has the most entries submitted, so they can kind of encourage their students to get involved and submit those designs. So more information on that will be coming over the next 6 months as we get that rolling. Some other items coming for the new year. We are working on a new website, so that'll probably come out in the summer or early fall, just before the presidential election. Working on improving the design and usability of the website, making it as useful as we can, and we probably will integrate that with whatever our new sticker is, and kind of integrating that design into the website design. As I mentioned, we're going to continue to improve quality control. This has been the drum that I've been beating with the staff for, the past year, and going to continue to make improvements in that so that we can make our process as airtight as possible. Continuing to try to promote useful and helpful information. We added some election security documents to the website. We're also going to add some, kind of how it works series is what we're calling it. That kind of explains to the public, what I was just talking about earlier with how the absentee ballot process works, how voter registration works, how results reporting works, all these different things to kind of give people a little insight into how those processes work, what, steps are there to help improve security in those processes and things like that. And then we're going to be working on updates to early voting locations. So I know this came up recently at a Board of Supervisors meeting, and the Board of Supervisors are the ones that ultimately decide this. and we'll be looking at some potential changes. So I'm going to be having some meetings with them over the next couple months to see what their thoughts are for that. Hopefully come out of that with some, a draft of how that might change. My hope is that we can expand the number of locations so that there are more county residents that are closer to some of those early voting locations, because while some of our magisterial districts have early voting sites, they do not all have early voting sites. Excuse me.
Do you have a date that we're, for the new website, do you have a completion date by?
I mean, we're hoping to have it up in, I think our drop dead date would be sometime in August, so that it's well before, the new election comes out. So we're in the design phase right now.
Okay, thank you.
And any changes in early voting locations would not apply to March, potentially June, depending on the time frame for when the Board of Supervisors acts?
So I think there's kind of two components to this. One is there's interest in, our main office and Haymarket are always, Haymarket Library are always early voting locations. When they drafted the ordinances around the primary and the general elections, the primary elections are held up for Lazo, and general elections are held at the DMV, with then a couple other locations that are open up late in Brentsville and Dumfries. I think there's interest in moving out of Lazo for primaries into the DMV. That won't happen for March. There's not enough timeline for that. So it's possible that this would be something for June, that there would be an ordinance just related to that for the June primary, and then there would be a more comprehensive ordinance that sort of applies to all elections. I'd like to see us move towards one ordinance that kind of governs all of the elections, have the sites be consistent, because to be honest, having the sites yo-yo back and forth between Lazo and DMV is not ideal. Every time the election, early voting is for Lazo, we get a lot of phone calls. Hey, the DMV should be open, why is it not open? So it would be nice to make that a little more consistent and figure out some more long-term plans for that. We also have to address the fact that special elections are not covered by either of those ordinances at that point, so that needs to be corrected as well. Okay, so moving on to budget requests for next year. So this process, at least my part in this process, is mostly done at this point. Most of the budget planning from the staff side really happens in September and October. And so we have completed that at this point, and we have a couple things that we have requested for fiscal 25. We always have our baseline budget for staff, for elections, for printing ballots, all that kind of thing. We have $239,000 in initiative requests, and then we have an addendum of about $400,000 for the presidential election next year. And just to give you a sense, our baseline budget is somewhere right around $3.5 million or so, just a tad under that. So in terms of our initiative requests, we have two initiatives. One is expansion of our staff for election compliance. So that is expanding. Right now we have 2 part-time positions, and we would be expanding that into 2 full-time positions. This is to help us meet a lot of compliance requirements. So we haven't had any permanent staffing increases since 2020. There's just a lot of different standards now that we have to meet that didn't exist years ago. So first of all, we have 160 plus different IT compliance standards now that were not in place a few years ago. We have our FOIA requests have increased from about 6 a year to over 100 per year over the last 2 years. Beyond that, there are a number of things with early voting, with mail voting that have really grown, that we need more people and more technical capacity to continue to excel in those areas. So our expansion would be the other components that we bring in a lot of temp employees So part-time employees are not particularly useful for our office, to be honest. So one of these positions would be a compliance specialist that would help manage security infrastructure, provide redundancy to our operations team, work with the IT staff in the county, evaluate contracts, assist with FOIA requests, build quality control procedures. So basically just providing more support for our current staff on that. Right now we are, if John and Sean both get sick at the same time, we're not in good shape on our IT end of things and all the expertise that they both provide in terms of, programming ballots to working with all of our election equipment, to managing our poll books. So we want to add someone else to assist with that process. We also want to add someone else, a voter registration assistant, another full-time position to help us continue to improving voter roll accuracy and working with all the list maintenance that we have. We've over time, you continue to grow and grow as a county, and that staff has to follow along with that as the workload increases. So those are our two requests around staffing. We also are trying to build a communications package, one of which is providing a mailed voter guide to all Prince William County households once per year. So the idea would be that each November, every household in Prince William County gets a voter guide that tells them about, where they can early vote, how to apply for a mail ballot, where to find their polling place, how to update their registration, just essential basic information. We live in an information age, but one of the challenges of the information age is the overload of information that people receive. And studies have shown that providing official information from government sources can be very helpful for people. So that's something that would be, I think a great boon to county residents. The other element of this is a dynamic texting package, which provides targeted messaging and answers to voter questions. So I mentioned already the voter guide. We did one of these. I managed to find enough money in our budget last November, not this past November, but the November before that in 2022, to get a voter guide out to voters. I didn't have enough money to squeeze it in for this past election. But that's something we're hoping to continue to provide people. I know this sort of issue has kind of yo-yoed back and forth in recent years. In my experience, this is something that is provided in every major county. I think we're doing it in a cost-effective way, and that we're not sending one to every voter, but every household, which saves money. And our version that we did was a one-pager that could simply be folded, which keeps the mail cost of it down. So I think we're doing it with as good of information as we can provide to people at as cheap of a cost as we can. The texting packages, there's an organization called TextMyGov. They work with a lot of government organizations, and that would provide a number that voters can text questions to. So you as a voter would be able to send a text to this service and say, where is my early voting site at? And it would show you what early voting sites were there. How do I apply for a mail ballot? It would provide you, a link to the application. So it has a number of things you can put in where it would take text or questions that it receives, and it would respond to those in a way that provides information for people. This can help us cut down on call volume, so people could go to the website, see the text number, and then they might be able to get that information. And if they still can't get it, they could, then call us up, obviously, and our staff will help them. There's also some possibilities here for geo-specific text messages. So let's say, we have a huge database with voter information, voter contact information in it. We don't always have email addresses from people, but we do have phone numbers from the vast majority of voters. And this text system, let's say we had a flood at a polling place, and we knew that we were moving that polling place to, let's say, a fire hall nearby, and this school was closed. Well, we could send a text to all the voters in that precinct. Now, it might not reach every voter, but anyone that does have a cell phone on file with us, the system would be able to determine whether that phone number is a cell phone number or not, and then it would send a text to those individuals. This could also help us with, say, let's say we're getting towards an election and we've got 3 precincts that are really short on election workers, and we're having trouble moving people around the county to those locations, enable us to send some text messages out, hey, we need people at your polling place. And those kind of really directed messages in specific situations can be very helpful. So, and this is, it's a pretty cheap package. It only costs about $24,000. It comes with, thousands and thousands of texts already included. So this is something we think would be a really good service for voters. So we have to await approval for the budget process that's coming this spring. So we'll see what happens with that, but I'm hopeful that we'll get approval for those things. Let me run back real quick here to the $392,000 as an addendum for the 2024 presidential general election. So that is basically looking at, with a presidential, we're going to need hundreds more election officers on election day. We're going to need more officers at each of our early voting sites to help with larger crowds. We're going to need more staff overtime as we have to process more ballots that are coming through the mail, as we have to prepare larger training classes and more training classes. We need to add more temporary staff to our office. So we estimated that was about the amount of money that we would need beyond what our baseline is for most elections. So it's about a 10% increase roughly to what our annual budget is, just a little bit more than that. And I think that would get us through. So the budget staff is working on that for us at the moment, and then we'll see how the initiatives come out through that budget process. Okay, go ahead.
So the text thing, so if someone asks us a pretty generic question, where's my polling place? That's very different than, I moved in June, but I missed, so does anyone monitor the text before they go out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd be able to see what those communications were, and that's really helpful because then you can modify. So there's certain things where you could group, like we could have a number of different things. We could just have early voting center. We could have a number of things that could all provide some sort of response, and you could, say, craft like 15 responses, and then have multiple triggers for those responses. And then what you can do is you can monitor what people are asking for and what's being sent to them. And if you see something that doesn't quite add up, we could follow up with a phone call with that voter. If we see that people are sending in words that we didn't anticipate and we need to, add some additional responses to that system, we can adjust that system on the fly to add things like that. So I know that I remember in the 2020 general, there was a lot of that where certain things would come up in the media and all of a sudden we'd get a flood of questions, and so we'd be able to adjust for things like that. So it's not going to be a perfect tool, but I think it's just one more thing to provide service to our voters. And if we have, if you're looking at this in a comprehensive way, if they're getting a voter guide in their home, if they have a text number they can send stuff to, if they have a website they can use as a resource, if we have staff at our office that can answer questions, you're kind of hitting all of your different types of voters there and all the different communication patterns that people, use today. Okay, so looking forward to FY26 then, we are getting towards the end of our 10-year cycle for our equipment, and we're talking about our ballot scanners and our ADA machines. We just replaced our poll books within the last year or two. So the scanners are going to need replacement. So I notified our budget people that this was going to be coming in the FY26 cycle. All of our equipment is still, active and supported at this point, but we want to do that before it gets too old, starts to create problems. We have, more breakdowns and things like that at polling places. So this is a pretty significant investment. We have to do this about every 10 years. It's roughly a $2 million investment. We have about 370 ballot scanners and ADA machines that we need for all of our polling places and for early voting. They are expensive. They run in the range of $5,000 to $6,000 a piece. So it is a pretty hefty investment. And we'd have a competitive bid and evaluation process for that. So that's what we would go through and do in FY '26. Voter registration report. Natalia, do you want to?
Yeah. Can I grab the mic?
Yeah.
Alrighty, so we didn't present the numbers for October, November, and we also have December numbers as well. Over here on the screen, you just have kind of summary for the whole year of 2023. Just to sum it up, we had about 14,000 new voters that were registered during 2023. Almost 20,000 name address changes, and this is within Prince William County. So if they moved from Loudoun and they change their address, that doesn't count in this particular number. So this is just 20,000 transactions within Prince William County. So it does show you that people are definitely moving around a lot. Over 10,000 registrations were canceled, and that's due to moving out of state. We do not cancel registration when they moving within the state. This is just moving out of state, deceased, felonies, all that stuff. That is all done based on list maintenance provided by state, and if it's NCOA or other ways for people to submit that information taken in consideration as well. Almost 28,000 confirmation mailings went out by State Board of Elections. Just to remind you, last year was the first year where State Board of Elections did the mailing twice a year. One was done in February, another one was done in July. The July one came with also out-of-state mailings. So I have not heard back from the state yet regarding if it's going to be done twice this year as well, but we will update you on that as well. We did start back in August. We started our address update program within Prince William County. Again, just to remind you, if we would receive undeliverable mail and there is a forwarding address on that envelope, our staff will send the address update form to that forwarding address to ask residents or those voters to either cancel their registration if they moved out of state or update their address. So we sent only if the forwarding address is present, those letters will go out. So we sent about 200 letters in period of September, October, November, December. Again, to remind you, during election, there's not that not that much mail coming in, just because we don't register people anymore at that time. We did also do that for our absentee, the ballots that came back undeliverable with the forwarding address. We did send those letters to those residents as well. Only 25 of those 200 came back. So we're still continuing with the process, but again, this is for voter to respond, so we can't make them to respond to that request. So the numbers, more details provided in the report. Do you have any questions?
No questions for me.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I would just note also, we talked at a couple meetings late last year about 429 challenges, basically citizen-based challenges. They're non-election day challenges to voter registration. And we have while the 429 challenges under state guidance do not allow me, if in a situation where a voter has moved, I can't initiate a 429 challenge in those instances. We do have a system worked out now where if people are providing this information from a reliable source, we have a process in the office where we do work to take some extra steps to put that voter on confirmation mailing and also send them an update form so that we are taking action on those pieces of information. So I know that some individuals have, provided us with that, and if anybody has questions about that or would like to, participate in that process, feel free to email our office, myself or Natalia, and we can explain how that process works. I think the individuals who are most heavily engaged in this, we've kind of discussed and worked out a process that kind of, I think, works best for everybody involved at this point. So, okay, new business. Now I do have before you guys get to new business, if you guys want to go back to the, there's the correct
Okay.
October ones.
All right, so we'll go back to approval of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, these minutes were previously circulated to the board and no corrections, and I move that we accept them as written. The October 16th board meeting and the post-election board meeting in Kansas.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pass unanimously. Thank you. So the next item is appointing new election officers.
Okay, you all have a list there of, I think it's at, John, is about 130 officers, is that right? About 130 new officers. Now, I will note for this that we're in some degree of transition with our party chairs at this point. So I did not hear back from our party chairs. Now, our policy is that, you know, we do send it to the party chairs, and if we don't have any response, that's essentially them, you know, confirming that it's okay. When we do have new party chairs in place, I could always send them this list and say, you know, the board already appointed these individuals, but if you all had any objections, they could then bring that back to your attention. So I'm happy to, you know, communicate with them about that with our new Democratic chair and once we have a new Republican Party chair in place. But at this point, you have that list in front of you. There was also one election officer that was nominated by the Democrats, I think a current election officer that was nominated from the nonpartisan group to the Democratic group. So you all have that list in front of you with the additional officers from Democrats, nonpartisan, and Republican.
Thanks. I move that we vote to appoint the new election officers as published and provided by the General Registrar.
Second.
Okay, so neither of the party chairs have responded at all to this list.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they didn't confirm, but, you know, according to the policy that you all established, that's basically them, you know, acceding to the appointments that those individuals have requested, basically, when we don't hear back from them.
Okay.
Hopefully we can, as we get the new party chairs established, we can work with them with that process.
right.
That also might bear, it's been a little while since that's been examined, so there may be a few elements of that might be good to revisit and re-examine over this year.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Pass unanimously. So these people will be eligible then to work in March if we
Yeah.
need them, right? Okay.
So based on your comment, Eric, I move that, let's see, probably by the March timeframe, that we as a board just revisit our policy on election officer approval.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I'm very happy with the process that we have. There's a lot of dialogue goes on between the party chairs and the general registrar and the board. So it's always good to put a date out there and a marker that we will actually go ahead and just review it for the year.
Okay.
Okay. Early voting hours and days, 2024 primaries.
Okay, so for early voting, the ordinance states that the locations for early voting are the main office, Haymarket, Gainesville Library, and for the Ferlazzo Building. I would note too that all of these next several items, we've sort of set them up for both elections so that we can be prepared rather than having to revisit those, too close to that June primary. So early voting for the March election starts in a couple weeks on January 19th. Early voting for the June primary starts on Friday, May 3rd. So if you all adopted the same early voting weekend hours that you have for the last couple elections, that would mean that initial Sunday, February 18th, and then the following 2 Saturdays, with the hours being 8:30 to 4:30, with the exception of it being until 5 p.m. on the weekends. And then similar, the dates would be June 2nd on Sunday through Saturday, the 2 following Saturdays, June 8th and June 15th, with again the same hours. I do think that, the Sunday that we had, it not being the last Sunday, is really helpful to staff because it's really the last break they get before a really tough 2 to 3 week slog of working every day, and for a lot of extended hours as well. The other thing that I thought was great this past election was that the Sunday voting there was really, as our first weekend day, it sort of kicked off the final push there. And I have to say that I think only our county and maybe Manassas City were the only places in the state that were open on that day. So it made it sort of unique, and it was kind of a Prince William County kind of thing on that Sunday. So I thought it was really great. We had a great. I know over at the office here we had great energy. A lot of candidates from both parties were here. I think they were giving out free food to people if they voted.
The turnout was actually pretty high at all three.
Yes.
All 3 locations.
Yeah, it was far and away the busiest day up till that point, in the early voting process. So it was definitely a success. So.
All right. Do we have a motion?
I was just going to ask a question. Do we have any feedback from the election officers? I know that there's a formal process election officers can give us feedback. Did we receive any feedback from the election officers who are involved with early voting regarding any of those days or times? None that you're aware of?
I don't think so.
Initially, it was tough to get them to work on Sundays, but now they volunteer, so it's grown on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my point is, we should just make sure, as part of our, every time we approve this, we should always look back to if there is a formal indication. That's the place where the election officers, they can give us verbal, but I would just encourage our election officers to give us formal feedback through the formal process so that we can document it and measure. So we are not making decisions based on anecdotes, but actual feedback. I know from several of the election officers and the chiefs I spoke with, I did receive verbal feedback, much like yourself and the team, but I think formal feedback helps us codify these particular dates and what we're doing, as opposed to just, having arbitrary information, because why not every Sunday? There's always the why not. So I motion to approve the primarily voting locations and dates as prescribed.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay.
Next is the ballot order for the primaries.
Okay, so you all have a table with the ballot order and the staff there listed.
Yes.
Which one is?
It's this one here. Ballot officers
Okay.
for the
Now
March
what?
and June election.
And John did a great job, preparing a bunch of this data and looking at, you're always trying to figure out this magic formula with ballot orders where you don't want to have any risk of running out of ballots at the polling place. You also don't want to order thousands and thousands of extra ballots and waste tax dollars, beyond what is needed. So looking at the turnout for these kind of elections, we see somewhere in the 20 to 30% range generally for a presidential primary. And we see somewhere in the 6 to 20% range for the congressional primary. So usually the presidential primary is obviously bigger. Neither of these are huge turnout elections, but both significant. It's hard to say. You look at historical numbers and you have kind of a quantifiable element to it there. You have to look at some of the other qualitative factors then, like, in this current presidential primary that's coming up, you have two very strong front runners. Is that going to reduce general interest in the race? Similarly, the congressional primary that we're looking at right now, those are very wide open seats, and I know there's already a lot of candidates that have declared interest in those races. So will that promote, higher interest than usual? So we thought we would approach this with hey, let's be covered for the presidential primary, and let's repeat that process for the congressional primary. Given that it's historically significantly lower, we know that we will be covered then in both of those scenarios. So what John developed here is looking at a ballot in terms of our actual ballot order itself, is looking at a roughly 30% turnout mark for what we would expect for both elections. It might be a little on the high side, but always better to lean that direction, which leaves us with somewhere around likely 10 to 12% for mail-in early voting, maybe 18 to 20% for election day. And then from that, we generated a ballot order that would put basically 60%. We're ordering essentially 100% ballots, although not for both parties. We have to order ballots for both parties, and we don't always know, who will vote for what. You could have a ton of Republicans and Democrats go out and vote for the opposite party. They might vote for their party. That's at their pleasure. But what we did was we calculated this and basically said, okay, the controlling party, the parties that control that district at the supervisor level, let's put a higher number of those ballots in those precincts. So in Brentsville and Coles and Gainesville, let's go ahead and plan for more Republican ballots in those districts, and let's order 60% of the ballots for those, of the registered voter total. And then let's order 40% of the voter total for the minority party. So what you'd have to have here is you'd have to have twice the turnout you would expect for any given party, basically, or in some cases 3 times the turnout you'd expect. And they'd have to all vote for that one party to have any risk of running out of ballots. Now, the other positive to this is that on election day, we monitor turnout totals. The precincts are reporting that on an hourly basis to us to tell us how many voters they have. So we can kind of see throughout the day how many voters we have that are coming through. So if we did have a precinct or two where it's like, boy, they're really turning out at this location, and we talk to the chief and say, yeah, they've been turning out, it's really heavy Democrats or it's really heavy Republicans, we can always provide some additional ballots to them for the very end of the day. But I think at these numbers, I just don't anticipate us having to do that, especially given how many people are continuing to use early voting and use mail voting. That takes a certain percentage of the people that are going to vote each election now. So I think this puts us in a pretty good shape for not having to worry about that issue. Should be more than enough for both parties, and again, yeah, we monitor that throughout the day. In terms of staffing, that's also on here. We have approximately 6 or 7 officers at each location. We have 8 at a few. I think it's a good numbers for party balance. That would mean, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 2 nonpartisans, or 3 of each and 1 nonpartisan, or a few more nonpartisan in locations where we're having trouble getting that party balance. We'll make sure that include in that number a chief, an assistant chief, and an equipment specialist that all have completed the certification this fiscal year, meaning they did that either in November or they would be doing that prior to this election. And I think that should be sufficient that's kind of similar to the numbers, just slightly less than what we had in this past November. Mm-hmm. And I think given the turnout that we're expecting, that should be enough. What we should see at a lot of these precincts is if we've got, a typical precinct for us is maybe 3,000, 3,500 voters. So if you've got about 20% of people showing up on election day, you're talking about maybe handling 600 to 900 voters at a lot of these locations. 6, 7, 8 officers should be able to get the job done really well. And I think our officers did a really great job this past November.
Eric, I have to confess that when I saw this on the agenda, ballot order, at first, my first impression was this was the order in which the candidates would appear on the ballot,
Oh.
because we had a special meeting last year where we had to decide which candidate would
Yes.
appear first, second, and third. So we don't have that issue this time. This is-
The state draws all of that because it's all federal and state, it's all federal level.
So when we say ballot
candidates.
order, how many are we going to order?
Right.
Not how the candidates are going to appear
Right.
on the ballot.
How many we're having our printer send to us to make sure to stock at all the precincts. Now, the math is taken out of that for both of our mail and early voting now. That's very easy, because we send exactly the number of ballots that we have to our mail voters directly, and we have ballot-on-demand printers for early voting. So all we have to do is have enough, a ballot paper at those locations, and we know we have enough ballots. So it's really just election day that we have to be prepared for. And I think the state recommends, 100% coverage, and that's really what we're doing here. We're just splitting it for the party. That's not always necessary, and given the amount of money that ballots cost, they're about 30 cents a piece or so, or a little bit more. So it does cost money to print them, so we like to try to print them out in a way that we are hitting that sweet spot between not spending too much and making sure that we have everybody covered. So, if the ballot order and the staffing look good to you all, or you guys have revisions, just seeking your all's approval on that so we can move forward with those plans.
I move that we approve the ballots and officers for the 2024 primary elections in March and June as published.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? So this is a estimate right now on January 4th. A lot can happen, and a lot is going to happen between now and March. I will confess that the last cycle, I early voted in the presidential primary. And by the time we actually got to the presidential primary, the candidate that I voted for had dropped out of the race. So there's always and we may come to the date of our primaries, and it may already pretty much be decided. But and that would obviously affect the outcome. But I think it's a good projection of what we should need. So.
I'd just like to compliment the staff, Jonathan and Natalia and everybody on the staff for not only the analytics that back up our decision, but also to the team for the training for all the election officers, the chiefs, assistant chiefs, because all that goes on behind the scenes, but it's paramount to, ensuring that we're doing our due diligence across the board. It's a big effort, and so this is indicative. Is never perfect. Again, we're in that never perfect region, but compliments to the team for all the time, energy, and effort. To Keith's point, we always reserve the right to, as we get closer to game day or election, to have to possibly change. But in terms of the process, impressed with what everyone's doing. So, just kudos to the team for that. Thanks.
That's great. And I think also for the June primary, after the March election, we'll have some numbers too. We could provide those to you all at the April meeting. If we needed to adjust the order and you guys wanted to make an addendum to that in any way, you could take action at that time. We'd still have time to supplement our,
Right.
ballot order for election day at that point too.
Yeah.
So we'd still have time.
So I don't know. I don't know whether the Republicans will have a primary for the congressional races. Do you know whether it'll be a caucus, convention, or primary? Have you heard anything about? Okay, so that'll, the party will decide that. There will definitely be a primary for the Democrats in both congressional races. And I've not heard of anybody running against Tim Kaine for the Senate primary, but that may happen also, so.
Yeah.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously, thank you. All right.
Okay, the next thing on here is the training plan. Now, I think this is only required for approval in the general election, but I thought, let's go ahead and work it in anyway. We have the results of the training survey from the last election. We do a survey after each election of the officers to get feedback on, what they thought of their class, what their experience was like on election day, what they thought of their chief, all that kind of stuff. I have to say we had very good training results this time. I would say we had good numbers before this election, and I thought they were great numbers coming out of this election. 380 responses. Certification classes got a rating of 68% as excellent, so that was a really big improvement from sort of the chiefs and the precinct leadership positions. They really liked the hands-on element of their classes. They really liked the provisional practice. They liked that there were more, trainers involved, so they really seemed to, appreciate that. So kudos to Tommy and his team for putting together, a good process there. And I know we've added a lot of people as well to help with some of these things, because I think one of the things for me when I first came in was noticing that we really needed more support for our full-time staff to make these things happen. There's only so much you can do as an individual. So I think Tommy and other individuals in our office have really used those resources, to improve those programs. The all-officer class, so this is the class that all the officers had to take, is sort of a lecture class and covers the most important elements. That got a 93% as either excellent or good. We asked them for their common assessment of sort of what word they would use to kind of describe the class, and engaged or satisfied was the most common word that they used coming out of that. Kudos as well to Dina and Rick. I see our staffing and training team back there. They get a lot of credit. 68% rated the communication with our staff as excellent, and we've continued to hear from officers that they feel like they are being communicated with better, whether that is Dina and Rick or their team calling them to give them updates. We've added a newsletter for officers. The officers also generally rated their chiefs really well. 70% scored an excellent this past election. So I think that survey yielded a lot of good results overall. And what we saw were all of the scores from our staffing team, from our training team, all moving upwards and improving. So that is good. That's the direction that, I like to see. And it shows that our officers feel like they're being heard, and we're using the results from these training surveys to sort of, continue to examine what we do, how we communicate with our officers, how we train them each election. So for March and June now, we talked about this a little bit before the last election, and that we will only need a small number of certification courses for new chiefs and assistants and those individuals that are being promoted into those leadership positions. Most of them have taken that course, so they've completed their certification, which is good through basically July, when we'll start over again. So because of that, we will have a new officer class, which will have hands-on training. I know that was a board suggestion from the last election, and I think we have enough time and space without having to do all of those certification classes that we did in November to have that. We'll also continue to have an all-officer training that'll mostly be online, but we will have a few in person just because that's what some people prefer. And that's just to kind of go over key areas with officers. So that is really for a lot of our returning officers that have worked the last election or a number of elections, just to kind of remind them of either things we've observed where they've made mistakes, things that have changed that we want to make sure to emphasize. Sometimes even if the law hasn't changed, we might change a form or a process. So it's a chance for us to give them some reminders. I think thankfully for this election, we're mostly going to see a lot of the same procedures and forms in place for these next two elections that we used in November. So that should mean give people a chance to really kind of groove in those processes as they go to work. Okay. Any concerns, questions about the training plan?
Okay. Let me, before we go to public comment, I would ask Eric that you post the slides on the website. I think it's a good overview for,
Yeah.
people that weren't here today, and even people that are here, they can see the slides and look at the numbers, and it'll help with that process.
We always post all the materials that are here that are either public copy, or if we have slides, when you go to our meetings page, there's a supplemental materials link, and Thalia always posts all of the materials from the meetings in that link. What she does also is when we have PowerPoint slides like this, and with the video, she'll take the video and she will put the slides up, in coordination with the video, so that someone watching the video can kind of see the slides as they go through the video as well. So we do provide that. So.
Okay, great. So we are now at public comment time. Anyone we have 2 people that are signed up, and then we'll also open it up to people who did not get on the sign-up sheet. So this is 3 minutes, and the first person that has signed up is Elizabeth Block.
Morning. I'm Elizabeth Block from the Coles District and the County Election Integrity Working Group. The first request is the 2020 tally tapes must be placed on the election office website. I'm requesting them again for probably the 40th time. But if they're placed on the public website, that's sufficient. Last October, you received a notice about poll book and scanner acceptance testing because the election office could not produce evidence that these were conducted on our, and I am glad, by the way, that you finally realized you have the need for an IT compliance person. Thank you very much. The county has the sole responsibility for that testing by its agreements with the vendors and by the voting system certification standard, Section 2.2, and the Virginia Electronic Poll Book Certification Standard. After multiple requests, the office produced an acceptance document for poll books, but it was not compliant with Virginia requirements. I asked you to explain this. I also asked you to perform a hash validation testing as required because the document provided did not show you performed it. So Mr. Olson was clear that anytime there's a question, simply ask the office or the Electoral Board. I did. I never received a call. No one from our team received a call. No one got an explanation. No one got an invitation to discuss. And the topic isn't on the agenda today, specifically. And I question why this is, but I do understand you recognize the need for an IT compliance person. That's a long-term goal. On another communication matter, in August of 2023, the Electoral Board agreed to perform a batch comparison audit of a race in the November election. In November, we assume perhaps you voted not to proceed with that, but again, after being asked about this, we got no communication as to why there was a change, despite multiple requests. The batch comparison would have conducted a hand tabulation check of precinct ballots to gauge scanner accuracy as compared to federal accuracy requirements. This is very important. This is essential. I attended one of these public audits, and they're public, and the Electoral Board and general registrars from 3 counties were present. All of them were perplexed over why the Prince William County Electoral Board could not simply explain why the audit didn't happen here. It's just a simple question. Maybe you changed your mind. I have no idea. Just no answer. The only thing we got was a weird, this office will communicate with party chairs at the appropriate time. I wish to remind you that this is a public audit on voting equipment purchased with taxpayer money and not a self-serving party event. You must respond to the public. Getting new party chairs has nothing to do with answering the public. You are not, I'm sorry, but it feels like you're in a club or something, you just don't want to answer, but you have to answer. George Washington was against political parties because they would serve themselves and not the people. He talked about that in his farewell address of 1796, saying they would, quote, become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. So I do ask our electoral board to please ask yourselves why you're not responding to the public. Are you just coming to monthly meetings? We asked you again to respond. And remember, on the compliance matter, if your computer systems are corrupted for many different, it can happen for many reasons, your data is in jeopardy. Elections, sadly, are now only about data, even though the official vote of record is the paper ballot. As soon as you put your ballot in a scanner, that file becomes a piece of data, which is read by a piece of software. So thank you for recognizing that you have to hire a compliance IT person, and I just request, more communication. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. The next person is Carol Noggle.
Good morning, Carol Noggle, and I wasn't going to speak until I heard about what you all are going to do in the high schools to have a sticker competition. And so I wanted to let you know that there's been a different approach this year for registering voters at the high school. I'm with the League of Women Voters, and there are 2 others here who regularly have gone to the high schools in collaboration with the Prince William Bar Association. They've been scheduling that for many, many years. We've been going to the high schools for well over 10 years in collaboration. They schedule it, we go. We meet in auditorium. Usually the lawyers present their program on So You're 18 for about 40 minutes, and then we have 30 minutes to do voter registration, talk about elections, talk about the history of voting, and so forth. And Chris knows very well that we often then come to the office with a stash of voter registration forms. This year there's been some sort of change that we didn't anticipate because the high schools are going to have a segment of time for, and I'm not sure who's, coming in to talk about mental health, which is very important right now, obviously. But it means that we don't have a time slot. And so I know the election office has been involved for decades of doing high school registration. So in the last few years, every year we have at least 2,000 seniors that we registered to vote. But we are not being scheduled for it this year. So I just want you to know that, and we're going to work that out. We're just, instead of collaborating with the Bar Association, we'll probably be contacting the school's teachers individually so that we can have that time. And sometimes they can set up time for us and sometimes not. It doesn't work to just sit at a table and expect the kids to come up and register, because we can't talk about the history of voting. We don't, and very much about the election and so forth. So we know that you all have been, the election office has been obligated, my understanding was, to do something in the high schools. I don't know if we can work out, make it, we've already been to what, how many high schools? Just barely gotten started. But because of the sticker contest, I said, whoa, then maybe you can have an expanded role. Brenda Cabrera was one of the former election office workers who would go to the high school. And she developed some really great materials to use. And then after she left, then the election office quite often did not have anybody who could go. So I just wanted you to know that there's been a difference, and we really are eager to make sure the high school get all the full information and get registered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comments? If you would please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Mylene Kent, and I live in Neabsco. One of the things that, I work the early voting and election officer, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 20 whatever years. But the early voting, what I experienced was that the public is truly not educated on the civics. They don't understand the process of 1 year it's presidential, the next year it's congressional, and so on and so forth. They're very, very confused this past election cycle. Some people thought they were voting for president, and then when they got their ballot, they were like, I don't know who this is, there's not an R, there's not a D, they're not in any order. They were very confused, and I think, in my opinion, that some people just didn't vote for certain things because they didn't understand. I'm very excited to hear that the website is going to be developed, and if I can make a suggestion, that maybe we do a civics class online to teach people, this is the year we're going to do this is the year we're going to do that, and explain how, the different, supervisor's going to be voted on this particular election, and just educate the public because they really don't understand. If I could say that. What else? I think another thing is education of the public, that how important the primaries are. A lot of people just think, well, whatever. Again, these are my opinions. We need to figure out a way to generate people to come out and vote. I don't care what party you're in. And again, I think it's educating the public as to what and why is going on. Because if we don't do our local elections, then it impedes the process in the future for our future children and grandchildren. One of the things about the text process that you're going to implement, I think that's very important as well. I think that this also could be a civics education to some people, or maybe you could have a speech in the beginning of the text, the stating some information before they even ask a question. Maybe it'll implement them not even needing a question. The feedback on complaints, I didn't register any feedback, which I probably should have. I'm just, personal reasons, I just did not. Some people the voters were complaining that they're only voting at DMV. The 4:30 people were knocking at the door at 4:31, and we couldn't do anything for them. And I think people were upset that they were getting off work and they couldn't vote. And I think that, again, my opinion, that weekends are very important for the public, for them to be able to vote Saturday and Sunday. Yes, it puts a lot of pressure on us people that are working, but I think the public need to vote on weekends. Another thing about the early voting is when we are processing, there was a lot of paperwork that was implemented, which is very helpful to updating the registrar's information on file. From what I've seen, I think the chiefs and the assistant chiefs are being trained on that paperwork, but I don't think there's enough training for the election officers. We're checking people in, and then all of a sudden, when did you move, with this date or that date? It gets very confusing, and it bogs things down. So I'm just suggesting a little more training for the election officers as well as the chiefs and assistant chiefs, because it just bogs down the whole process. And we definitely want to update the information that we have. The other thing that I saw during the election, early voting election in November, was both parties were handing out their sample ballots. Both parties were very aggressive towards the voters. I received verbally a lot of complaints that they felt intimidated. They were not happy about how they were approached. That was so aggressive, really aggressive. And it didn't come to blows, but there were some heated things happened. So I don't know. Also, the other thing is that both parties did not continuously comply the 40-foot away from the polling door, if you will. They were constantly in the parking lot. They were not staying in their space of what they're supposed to be 40 feet away from the polling door. We constantly had to go out and tell them, back up. They were in the street, the parking lot, they were causing traffic issues. There was accidents. Last year I had my car hit at the DMV when I worked. And so the way that it's set up at the DMV is cumbersome, I guess, because of the traffic of the DMV. It's very, very busy. And the flow of traffic, people do not pay attention to the one-way traffic in the parking lot. So I don't know what my suggestion is, maybe that both parties' tents be pushed back further on the parking lot so that they're not as aggressive, or it doesn't impede the people that are coming in that are handicapped that want to vote, in their cars. They have a hard time just parking, just getting in there because of all the parties handing out their sample ballots. There was confusion with, people in the cars. Well, I don't have a sample ballot. Well, do the people from the parties come up to the car, or can we go get the paperwork and give it to? I mean, there were so many ideas given to us, and we didn't know which one was right. And it became kind of an issue. The public was not, in my opinion, prepared for this past election because it was a huge ballot.
All right, could you wrap it up?
I'm sorry. I'll end it right there. I just thank you very much for your time and listening to me. I love working with you guys, and let's do it this year.
All right, well, thank you very much. Could I get you to fill this out so we have your, yeah, and thank you. And yeah, the DMV is a beast. Yeah. All right, is there anyone else that would like to, okay, would you come forward and identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Laura Feldmusha, and I am on the east side of the county. But anyway, my first thing is a compliment. I was at an event, kind of just a generic event, and people were talking about their election experiences, and I was just kind of listening, et cetera, because I always like to just listen to comments. I heard so many positive things about the election process, the number of days that people had the opportunity to vote. I did hear about people make comments about the fact that it was a long ballot, but I heard positive things about the fact that your election officials on the day, when people went in, the election official would say, well, and explain it first, that we have a long ballot, and they had the opportunity to go out and get a sample ballot if they wanted one, et cetera. Or they could consult their phone. Anyway, I want you to know that your election workers did great stuff, okay? That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing I would like to say is I am one of those people who am outside the election place. The polling place I work at, I've worked at for years. I knew everybody in it, then you redistricted, and you shifted our lines quite drastically. And when that happened the first time, you did a mailing of your new precinct location a couple of years ago. It was kind of an unclear mailing. I know when I looked at it, I thought, gee, if you're visually impaired, because it's gray on white, you won't even be able to find your information. So I kind of think that might be an important thing when you do this mailing this time, is to make sure you're thinking about people, older people maybe with visual issues, which I seem to be having now, and to make that precinct location large and stand out. Because this past year, when I worked outside that same polling area, numerous people didn't know where to vote. Even though it's been 2 years, they swore they'd never heard of this, even though I knew they'd been there before. I mean, there were just lots of questions. I ended up redirecting people over and over and over, and they were so frustrated. So I think on your mailing, when you do it this time, if you make the precinct information larger and bolder so it jumps out at them, because you have other things on that paper that it might be more recognizable. And then in your other information, to just remind people to check their precinct information. Don't assume, just make that comment, okay? It's a common thing. But overall, I think you guys are doing a great job, and I want to thank you.
All right, thank you. Could you
Yes, I will.
fill this out? Okay, anyone else would like to make comments? All right, seeing none, we will close public comment. All right. Do we need a closed session?
Not unless you guys do.
Okay. All right, so, again, thank you all very much. I think we've made a lot of progress. Eric's report was very good this year in terms of additional steps we're going to be taking. And again, presidential years are just a world difference than any other cycle that we're working in. So, you know, working together, all of us, election officers, the board, the office, and voters, you know, we can make it a positive process for everyone in the primaries and for the general election. So, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn the meeting of the Prince William County Electoral Board at 11:44.
Second.
All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. So we are adjourned.